Welcome to everybody. Welcome to our Kirstenbosch Wednesday talk, brought to you by Room to Grow, Sandy and Straight Nature. Firstly, I'd like to thank Straight Nature. Without this, it wouldn't be possible. Without them, this whole talk wouldn't be possible. Straight Nature is the leading specialist natural history publisher in Southern Africa, associated with the best and most highly regarded field guides in the region. Straight Nature publishes full-color illustrated books across a variety of subject areas, including birds, mammals, reptiles, trees, and flowers, as well as the marine environment, geology, astronomy, and general wildlife, and of course, the ever-popular children's nature. And then Room to Grow. I'm Brett, I'm the owner of Room to Grow. We're an exterior design and project management company that's been installing and designing outdoor living spaces in and around Cape Town since 2002. And we offer a complete suite of landscape design, construction, and other design, exterior design elements from our design center, and you can find out about us at roomtogrow.co.za or follow us on our socials. And then I'm very, very pleased today to introduce Alan Lee. Alan is the Science and Innovation Program Manager at BirdLife South Africa, where he leads the organization's work on the Red List of Birds for South Africa, Lesotho and Eswatini. He has a PhD on Amazonian parrots, and his research spans birds of the fynbos and karoo, citizen science, and conservation biology. Alan is co-author of Birds on the Brink, a BirdLife South Africa collaboration with Penguin Random House that blends rigorous science with compelling storytelling to showcase the region's threatened bird species. His work focuses on making biodiversity science accessible and inspiring action to protect vulnerable species and habitats. And the book Birds on the Brink will be on special to all registrants of the talk at a 15% discount at the Botanical Society bookshop, as well as online through Kirstenbosch. And as usual, at the end of the talk, we will be we'll have a Q&A session. And we're fortunate to have Alan's co-author, Shamisa Banda, joining us, and she'll join us for that Q&A at the end. So during the talk, if you'd like to add your questions to the Q&A box, we'll get to those at the end. So without further ado, Alan, looking forward to this. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Brett. Thanks so much for the invite. Thanks everyone for being here today. It's so awesome to address a pool of fellow wildlife and nature enthusiasts. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about South Africa's special birds and the people trying to save them. It's been end of a long journey, and I know that there are a lot of plant people in the audience, and so I thought I'd better address your concerns about why I talk on birds, by trying to answer this question here: why are birds important? Why do birds matter? And maybe just take a moment to think of the adjectives which are coming into your mind as you see this glorious secretary bird. Personally, I think it's really beautiful, and because we've got plant people in the audience, I thought I'd better also include a plant and bird photo over here. Orange-breasted sunbird, undoubtedly as a fynbos bird fanatic, is one of the most beautiful birds in South Africa. Pity this one's being a little bit shy and hiding in Protea aurea, maybe. I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong. Moving on, birds inspire emotion, and this here is Andrea Angel. She works for BirdLife South Africa. She's the leader of the Albatross Task Force, and she spent a lot of her life living on these remote oceanic islands with really special birds. And I mean, look at the emotion on that face. And it's that emotion that inspired this woman's life in conservation. And she tells her personal story about these birds in Birds on the Brink, and it's a standout story. It'll bring a tear to your eye. It still brings a tear to my eye just thinking about it. But these emotions connect us with nature and inspire us to do beautiful things. They're also functionally, if you're just a cold-hearted ecologist or scientist, just useful for making nature work. Those of us who love the fynbos, of course, the classic example is a Cape sugarbird pollinating our proteas, but they're also out there eating pests or pollinating flowers or eating seeds. Our featured bird over here is a protea seed eater, which is one of the threatened endemic birds of the fynbos biome, cute, but under threat due to the loss of the fynbos, which we see unfolding around us. Birds, of course, are also really important culturally and as emblems nationally. We've got the blue crane over here, or the purple-crested turaco as the inset, really important bird in Eswatini, and the secretary bird, of course, on our coat of arms. And again, this tale of the blue crane was one of conservation success. The population really benefited at some stage from agricultural activities in the Overberg area, but research by Christy Craig and the Fitzpatrick Institute and the Endangered Wildlife Trust have shown that this major population stronghold has been in decline, and unfortunately this bird was uplisted to vulnerable. It's again a threatened bird species, and that's our national bird. So when we see birds declining, we know that there must be something wrong out there, something going on. There are all sorts of birds which we can describe as being sentinel species because they're at the top of so many ecosystems. They're reliant on nature being intact. The world that they've adapted to is changing, and we see that in bird populations. So blue crane pointing to some kind of changes, possibly agricultural intensification in the Overberg region and populations on the wane. Other classic examples would be the vultures, apex scavengers. There is an absolute crisis going on across Africa, well, globally, really, with pretty much most vulture species now endangered at really critical levels. An example here is spread from the Birds on the Brink book is the white-headed vulture, where we highlight the threats to the birds as well as interesting facts. I know that some people are thinking it's like an old actress has had its heyday, but they're really useful birds in the environment. And the maps that we have in Birds on the Brink are based on the most recent citizen science data available, specifically uses a bird lasso from which we've created habitat suitability models and which the incredible team at Penguin Random House have digitized to make those maps that you'd be familiar with in existing bird guides. So if we look at this map over here, we'll see that the bird is only restricted to the Kruger National Park. And if we look a little bit closer, we'll see that it's actually disappearing from the northernmost parts of that park, which points to problems. And we can tell from declines in the sentinel species that action is required. For each of the species which we feature, we also we try and include a conservation hero, a researcher, conservationist, or even just a bird guide. The realm of people helping birds spans a diversity of professions and passions. One of the more famous people in vulture conservation is Darcy Ogada, who works for the Peregrine Fund based out of Kenya, and she highlighted the good work being done by Martin Odino, who works with communities in order to try and tackle the vulture poisoning crisis unfolding across much of the continent. Many of these slides, I think, could be presentations in themselves. I know that Belinda van der Merwe helped get this presentation into acceptable order. This is not one of her favorite slides, but each panel here and each of the words in the panel without a picture is the topic of its own talk. We're having massive impacts on the world, advertently and inadvertently, and these are having consequences on our most charismatic, our most iconic bird species. Yeah, they range from habitat loss to poisoning of vultures to trying to tackle climate change and bringing in wind turbines, which chop up large bird or raptor species. The bycatch from fishing is quite a big problem for our coastal seabirds and our pelagic seabirds. And our pelagic seabirds are competing with industrial scale fishing, which means that their food resources are becoming limited. Birds interact with what we leave over it in the rubbish heap. And many of our species, especially those on our remote Marion Island, are suffering from introduced species to which they're not adapted and which can create havoc agriculturally, ecologically. So to try and tackle all of these problems, there are a multitude of conservation NGOs in South Africa and of course across the continent and worldwide. I work for BirdLife South Africa, and as a result, most of the work that I know touches on the people with whom I interact on a daily basis. So given the gravity of what we've just seen, let's say that most people in BirdLife South Africa work very hard. They're dedicated conservationists. They're very serious until you put them in front of a camera, and then they're quite a lot of fun. It's an amazing group of people, really, led by Mark Anderson, who's won Lifetime Achievement Awards for his work trying to save South Africa's bird species, flanked by Hanneline Smith-Robinson and Fani du Plessis. And each one of these people over here is doing their bit in order to try and protect our precious bird species. So to get back to the serious, with our backdrop of the beautiful Bateleur, also a threatened bird species with its range, like the white-headed vulture, restricted to protected areas like Kruger National Park. BirdLife South Africa strives to conserve birds, their habitats, and biodiversity through scientifically based programs, emphasis on the science from the Science Innovation Program Manager, through supporting sustainable and equitable use of natural resources, and by encouraging people to enjoy and value nature. There are many conservation organizations out there, and many of their mottos or their visions are built around similar pillars and visions. BirdLife South Africa fits into a larger partnership of conservation organizations led by BirdLife International, which represents over 100 local nature-based conservation organizations across the planet, with emphasis on protecting species, sites, systems, and by engaging with society. Our conservation division, led by Hanneline Smith-Robinson, in order to enact the work which pertains to these visions, these pillars of conservation, has various programs, and those include dedicated seabird conservation program led by Alistair McInnes, projects that look at the conservation of entire landscapes led by Aaron Chatif, species-specific conservation programs, such as conservation of our secretary birds led by Linda van der Heever, real smile-inducing work undertaken by Nandi Tabela with her outreach to schools and communities, the international collection coming with Dr. Charlotte Boyd, and then advocacy work, which details dealing with environmental impact assessments, laws, and litigation, very hard work, and the Science and Innovation Program led by myself. And what we were up to over the last 5 years since 2021 was undertaking basically a risk assessment, extinction risk assessment of all the birds of South Africa, Lesotho and Eswatini. And it's inherently depressing work. Many people have heard of, a species is endangered, meaning that it's likely to go extinct within a short period of time. And it's just one of the descriptors used to classify birds of conservation concern. So we've got extinct in the wild, critically endangered, vulnerable. All these birds have a high risk of extinction. And then we've got birds which are heading that way, which are near threatened birds. And even birds which are in decline may still well be classified as least concern. It's not just rates of decline which determine if a species is endangered or not. It could be population size. It can be other geographic related threats, the extent of occurrence, where birds or organisms are found, and the guidelines for getting to these threat categories involve various criteria which are guided by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or the IUCN. And the results of the regional red listing projects are normally or have been published in books. So the first IUCN guided red list assessment was undertaken by Keith Barnes, published in 2000, and then in 2015, led by Martin Taylor, Fancy Peacock, and Ross Wendlas. The most recent 2025 edition is an online book, or basically a collection of web pages, which makes it free to access to all. So how do we go about assessing extinction of risk? Well, we need data, we need information. Wherever possible, we collaborated with bespoke researchers and conservation organizations who were doing work in the field, monitoring populations, and where we didn't have bespoke researchers, then we turned to citizen science. Citizen scientists are people who contribute to conservation projects. The most important for BirdLife South Africa are those hosted at the Fitzpatrick Institute, which include SABIP2, an atlasing project, the coordinated water bird counts, or the car counts, coordinated avifaunal road counts. And anyone can be a citizen scientist. I'm hoping that many of you in the audience today are citizen scientists. And it's easy to become one. If you know anything about birds, then all you need to do is download an app. BirdLass is the one which benefits BirdLife South Africa the most. And every time you log a bird, we get a GPS position of where that bird was located with supplementary information should you wish. So we've got a range of scientists over here. Linda van der Heever, program manager, working with Secretary Birds and Vultures. Matthew Rolowitz, recently appointed to try and save the Botha's lark. In the middle is Dr. Dave Ellis Smith and my daughter, Eleanor Rosalie, ringing birds in Port Edward. And on the far side are some friends who I rope into doing counts with me with the coordinated avifaunal road counts, Judy and Claire Jorgensen from Uniondale. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure spending a day out with you. So what were the results of this? And again, apologies for this table in the slide. I was allowed to keep one, Linda. I wanted many more charts and things, but apparently they don't come across so well. So where people like Shamisa is really useful in order to try and emphasize how we get across the science, how we communicate the science to a broader audience. But I wanted to include this slide because it was a slide in which was part of a presentation I gave on the Flock to Marion voyage out to sea to go and see, which was a pilgrimage for me. It was to go and see these threatened bird species which live on our remote subantarctic island and which are threatened by house mice, by overfishing, bycatch in the longline industry. And this was the first time I was synthesizing this data and summarizing across all these various assessments which we'd done, where we'd looked in detail at all the data and made charts and maps and charts, and where I'd started to synthesize the information. Okay, so where are we now? Where are we now in 2025 compared to 2015? And while I was giving this presentation, it struck me that we're really losing the battle to conserve our birds. In 2015, if we compare like for like, there were 126 birds listed in the Red Data Book of Birds, the Eskom Red Data Book of Birds, published in 2015. And in 2025, we had 148 species listed as threatened or near threatened. We have close to 40 deteriorating species and 10 improving species, with close to 100 indicating no change in their threat status. They're still vulnerable or endangered or critically endangered. And conservation success, and in terms of describing and improving species, is all relative. An example would be the wattle crane. It's a really beautiful crane, really small numbers here in South Africa, and it's been downlisted from critically endangered to endangered. Basically, the stewardship work being undertaken by the landowners within KwaZulu-Natal, by the dedicated conservation efforts of conservation heroes at EWT, mean that the population is stable, but it's still tiny, and any kind of disease or big stochastic events could easily see the loss of the species to our nation. So yes, success is relative. I'm often asked which is South Africa's most endangered species. And we have 11 species which are critically endangered, so imminently in danger of disappearing from South Africa. And which one you choose from these will very much depend on your passions and your interests. So for bird people living on the coast, your favorite bird may well be one of the whiteback large albatrosses. This one, the Tristan albatross, breeds only on the Tristan da Cunha archipelago, and there are only a few thousand of these birds. They're vulnerable to bycatch and longline fishing, and it's a rare visitor to South Africa's shores. It could be a cute little species such as the Leach's storm petrel. The species is actually abundant in the Northern Hemisphere. It's listed as critically endangered in South Africa because there are only a handful of these birds breeding in the old buildings and stone walls of Dawson and Dyer Island, possibly only one of those islands now. And there's very little conservation work going on those. Those are protected areas, but this is a special bird. It's the only population, maybe a special population, in the Southern Hemisphere. This is the southern banded snake eagle, a magnificent bird which is restricted to northern KZN and the coastal forests of Mozambique. I recently went to KZN to try and see this bird, and I couldn't find it. It lives in very specialized ecotonal forests that border on savannas. And when I mentioned my failure to find this bird to Hanneline, she said, yeah, it used to be a common feature sitting on the pylons, but certainly even with the help of a guide, we were unable to track one down. Loss of habitats and electrocutions on electricity infrastructure are big threats to the species. One of our raptors with the smallest population is also one of our smallest raptors. It's the Taita falcon. This beautiful photo by Anthony, who's a conservation hero for this particular species, together with Andrew Jenkins. Lives in the Bladder River Canyon, and there's a very small population of these, which also looks to be declining. The reasons aren't completely clear. Could be competition from other raptor species or loss of habitats. There's no distinctive reason why it should be sliding towards extinction. For me, one of the species which deserves most conservation attention is this, possibly to you, very boring bird on our screen now, the Botterslark. This is an endemic bird species. It is only found in South Africa. It is only up to us as South Africans that we can save the species, turn its fate around. Its fate's tightly tied to the grassland habitats, which are disappearing and disappearing at a rate which is really of concern. It exists mostly outside of protected areas, and its conservation success is very much tied to local communities and landowners. And we really hope that the resources which we're trying to muster to protect it have some kind of impacts. Fundraising to protect this bird was incredibly hard. I mean, we've known that this has been on the slide towards extinction since 2015, or even before. In 2000 was already listed as endangered, but the situation is really critical now. From a possible population of about 2,000, it's down to 300 or so. Yeah. A population that's even smaller in South Africa is the blue swallow, absolutely stunning bird. And again, its survival depends very much on a combination of things. So specifically, it breeds in aardvark burrows in the Midlands area, mostly outside of protected areas. And the aardvark is being uplisted to a species of conservation concern now by the Endangered Wildlife Trust in the parallel mammal red list assessments. This was, according to Steve McKean from Conservation Outcomes, the worst breeding season on record for this particular species, which has been monitored in detail year on year for many years now. This is Steve's story in Birds on the Brink. We can see in the map the very limited distribution to the Midlands, records from Eswatini, and then it travels to South Africa from Central Africa. And we do need to protect these remnant grasslands and the entire ecology that goes around them in order to save the species. Right, the vultures. I'll let you just soak in the absolute magnificence of the bearded vulture for a moment. An adult bearded vulture really is one of the most striking birds in the world. Again, a critically endangered species. Amazing conservation work by Sonia Kruger and her colleagues at Ezenvelo, KZN. Wildlife, but very vulnerable to poisoning of carcasses for the control of jackal and other perceived pest species. We have a sequence of vultures now coming up, definitely the most endangered group. Within South Africa, the hooded vulture, once widespread right across Africa, all the countries where there's some kind of vulture monitoring going on are seeing declines. This was once a common species across Western Africa, and there are a multitude of reasons causing the decline of this particular species, which include deliberate poisoning for traditional medicine use. So body parts are used in traditional medicine in many parts of Africa. But it's more complicated than that. So it's the loss of our natural rangelands where there were initially plains of wild animals from which to feed. The species became very dependent on open abattoirs before health and safety started closing those down across much of Western Africa. And as such, the urban populations which had adapted to feeding on the scraps are now also in decline, critically endangered species. Leopard-faced vulture, uplisted to critically endangered for the first time during this red list assessment, has a very small population in South Africa. It is truly a magnificent vulture, and it breeds in large camel thorn trees, which are targeted by the charcoal industry. And this bird is the focus of research by dedicated conservationists in Namibia. They've placed satellite trackers on these and shown that these birds range over many countries, and as a result, they're vulnerable to threats emanating from any one of these countries. So conservation of these species really needs to be a concerted effort between nations if we're going to stand any chance of saving them. The whiteback vulture is still one of our more common species, but that's very relative. The populations are now just over 10,000 or so individuals, and this is the species which, at these mass poisoning events, which you'll be hearing about, which you read about in our news outlets, it's the one that's most frequently encountered. So the fact that it comes together in very large flocks and descends on these carcasses, which are deliberately poisoned in order to kill them so that they don't act as sentinels for poaching activities, is hugely problematic and driving them to extinction at an unsustainable rate, not just in South Africa, but across the continent. In addition to that, vultures where there are vulture restaurants or where there are safe places to eat are vulnerable to lead in the meat, chronically so. We all are, but vultures specifically so. And birds that are eating meat with large amounts of lead in it become very weak, and they're unable to fly as far, and they're more vulnerable to starvation and other impacts. So some of the conservation work going on to try and save the whiteback vulture are documented in Birds of the Brink, and these are specifically to try and address poisoning, lead poisoning, impacts with power lines. Linda van der Heever, dedicated conservationist, and Machawe Mapalala over here undertaking his doctoral research on whiteback vultures in Eswatini. Maps is now a lecturer at the University of Eswatini and was a valuable member, editor of the Red Data Book of Birds, which also encompassed his country. The white-headed vulture. Yeah, white-headed vulture wraps up our list of 11 critically endangered species. It would be a very long talk if I then started going through all the endangered species. So I'm just going to highlight a few species, almost picked at random, during the preparation of this slide. A species which has just been uplisted to vulnerable from near threatened is the lesser flamingo. And it's iconic of an entire group of birds, the water birds, which our red list assessments show are doing worse now than ever before. So when I say water birds, I know many people think ducks and things, and that ducks and things have done or are perceived to be doing well because we built a bunch of dams and things, but that benefit is no longer being seen, and we're seeing declines not just in duck species, but other water bird species. So flamingo is a water bird species. Black stork is another water bird species dependent on our river systems. It's been uplisted to endangered. Marsh harrier is a raptor dependent on wetlands, and it's also vulnerable or endangered. Grey herons, one's like a default bird species and many dam species, is also in decline. It still needs concern, mostly just because of the large population, but it could easily have been uplisted to a threatened species category during this last assessment round. So the lesser flamingo, a beautiful bird, breeds in large colonies at just a few sites across Africa, about 4 sites. And one of the important sites was Camphor's Dam just outside Kimberley. And there's been no breeding there for many years now as a result of deteriorating water conditions and water levels, which mean that the breeding sites of this have recently become inundated due to the raw sewage basically coming from Kimberley Town and flowing into that dam, which has had repercussions such as botulism outbreaks on other common bird species such as the red-knobbed coot. So as a whole, this species is emblematic of problems within our water bird community. The albatrosses, various species of these, absolutely magnificent birds. I've touched on Andrea's story, but Shamisa also did her. Masters on bycatch, which species are vulnerable to those, so specifically sooty albatross. We've got conservation heroes trying to mitigate those, such as Reason Nyengera, who actively works on the boats, the long line fishing boats, in order to implement mitigation strategies. So putting hook pods on these hooks with the bait so that the birds don't grab onto those and not dragged underwater and drowned, for instance. Botha's lark, one of our most critically endangered bird species. This is a species that's been the focus of much scientific, well, attempted scientific works, really hard to study an endangered population. But citizen science pointed out that there was a problem with species when we did the assessments looking at SABAP2 data back in 2015. Peter Ryan has singled this species out as the species for which you'll get the most conservation bang for your buck, because it's a small isolated population, and if we can save the species, we will be saving a very important bird species. It's a complicated scenario though, because it involves trying to work with landowners outside of formal protected environments, and where the wind industry is now starting to come in, and where having this bird on your land is viewed in some cases as a liability rather than a benefit. So there's a lot of policy advocacy work that needs to be undertaken, a lot of the winning of hearts and minds that needs to happen. One of my favorite birds, Cape Rock Jumper, again touching on the fynbos theme. This is a species which I almost find in my backyard, living in the edge of the Baviaanskloof. Really beautiful bird. When I started looking at citizen science data on this one, it jumped out as one of the species most in decline, according to where and when people were seeing this. And as a result, we started doing a bunch of research in order to see why these declines could be happening. We had we suspected that it had to do with climate change, because this is a species that lives in open habitats, out in rocks and things. It's a species that should be doing well because increased fire regimes means there's more potential available habitat. There's just more rocky open environments. It's a ground hopping bird species. So why isn't it doing well in the face of changes within the fynbos? And we detected this link between rates of decline according to citizen science data, and and rates of warming. So when we thought, well, maybe it's just physiologically poorly adapted to this changing climate, we caught it and a bunch of other bird species, tested its stress responses to heat, and found that it has got the lowest thresholds to heat compared to any other bird species. And further work by Krista Oswald, also featured in Birds on the Brink, then went on to look at, well, if you just physiologically poorly adapted to living in a hot environment, aren't there ways that you can get around that? So for instance, by living in the shade, etc. And she undertook multiple years of research, confirmed that the species is poorly adapted to living in in the fynbos. Basically, it's a sister species to the Drakensberg rock jumper, because it relies on evaporative water loss to keep cool. So on hot days, it's actually losing water, and our hottest months in the fynbos are also our driest months across a lot of the species range. But more shockingly, when we were trying to see if these impacts were translating to fledging success rates, predicting that hot days would result in poor robotic condition of the birds, we found that we didn't get enough data because wormslung were eating all the chicks, which was a real surprise result. So this bird, which is poorly adapted to a warming climate, is living in an environment where a natural predator, the wormslung, has a larger window of thermal activity in which it can operate. And as a result, it was quite an astonishing find. So it's getting a double whammy. African penguins have been in the news a lot recently, especially this year, globally uplisted to critically endangered this year, mostly driven by absolute colony loss and declines from Namibia, but our colonies here in South Africa, our few special colonies, are also in decline. And this is related to declines in food availability, and as a result, a lot needs to be done in order to turn this the fate around of this charismatic species. So trying to get fisheries to stay away from valuable foraging grounds is foundational to that. But most recently, the conservation crisis, which is unfolding at the moment in relation to this, is regarding one of the larger popular colonies near Port Elizabeth, Gqeberha, Algoa Bay, where it's now legal to have more ship activity, ship-to-ship bunkering in close proximity to this. And I mean, there's very good evidence to show that the penguins are doing very poorly as a consequence of that. And yeah, we're a very long way from saving the species. I've included this bird species just because another of my favorite habitats or biomes within South Africa is the Karoo biome. And this is just a fantastic species by Barry Cohen. It's a photo of the red lark, which is endemic to South Africa. Lives in the Karoo region of the Bushmanland area as you head towards the Kalahari region. And this species looked like it was doing okay, according to citizen science data. The species also received a lot of attention from researchers to determine how birds are going to be adapting to changing climates. And again, just like the rock jumper, this bird is physiologically poorly adapted to very hot climates. So work by Reino Kemp, featured in Birds on the Brink, shows that it is very likely that populations will be declining going into the future as our arid zones specifically warm up at unprecedented rates. See them while you can. All right, so try and cheer you up by including a picture of Karina Pinar and her smiling face working to save a southern bald ibis. And this is a conservation success story. So it's not all doom and gloom out there. The conservation story that revolves around the southern ibis goes back a very long way. So it was a species which had a much wider range than it does today, extending into the Eastern Cape. There are even records from close to Cape Town, historically speaking, in colonies that no longer exist from the Eastern Cape. The range contracted to basically be centered on Lesotho and the surrounds, and was flagged as being a species in decline and needing conservation action by researchers such as Roy Siegfried, going back decades. Dedicated conservationists such as David Manry undertook some of the first population estimates and showed that the population was really small. It was being hunted out. As a result, national protection action was implemented, and it became a threatened species. It's illegal to shoot these birds, and there has been protection of its habitats. There's also a bit of an understanding about why it's in decline, related to grassland habitat degradation, specifically alien vegetation encroachment into some of our natural wetland habitats. And there's a lot of colony monitoring going on. So this is something that Karina does, and through the citizen science network of people who do monitor these colonies, they're getting protection at their colonies, at their breeding grounds when it happens the most. Although we can't say that it's recovered yet, rates of decline are definitely slower, colony abandonment is lower, and there does seem to be evidence that the colonies, the strong colonies which are being monitored, are doing better as a consequence. So conservation does work. It can take a long time to work. Another high altitude grassland bird species is the yellow-breasted pipit, very restricted range. And we feature here just an extract from Nandi Tabela from BirdLife South Africa's Empowering People program, where she focuses on the work that's being undertaken in local communities in KwaZulu-Natal, focusing on this man over here, Dalu, who really loves birds. He's a bird guide, he's a landowner, he's got cattle, but this love of birds is resulting in conservation action, the engagement of the local communities around Nsekeni, and gives us hope about the future status of this particular threatened species. One of the feature birds of conservation success, and one of the few vulture conservation success stories, is the Cape vulture. Cape vulture breeds in colonies, and the larger colonies within South Africa have been doing very well due to conservation monitoring, due to the active conservation, rescue, and recovery efforts undertaken by organizations such as Volpro, the EWT, and the species was recovering. It looks like it's kind of leveled off now, but although we'd love to say that it's now a species of least concern, unfortunately, we also know that it's being targeted for use in traditional medicine markets. It is being targeted, actively poisoned for those, and it's also vulnerable to poisoning, which kills off large numbers of vultures associated with poaching events of rhinos, elephants, and other charismatic fauna. So it's not in the clear yet, but it's an example of how many people dedicating their lives to conservation work can turn around the fate of a species. I've touched on southern bald ibis and just decided to include the species because I've got a special affinity to bald things. I don't know why. It's a lovely photo courtesy of Albert. Another conservation success story is the spectacle petrel. This species breeds at Inaccessible Island, and it's an example of how getting rid of an invasive species, in this case here, feral pigs, can turn around the fate of a species. So this was headed towards extinction. When the pigs died out on the island, the species started to recover at phenomenal rates and is thought to be in the clear presently. Similarly, black-browed albatross, and very unusual conservation success story, which revolves around conservation activities on their breeding islands. The eradication projects which are being talked about can work, and they can save species. So one of these ambitious projects is BirdLife South Africa's mouse-free Marion project. It's really a horror show going on that island at the moment, with these monster mice eating chicks and birds alive. The mice are now doing very well because of a warming climate, and if we can get rid of the mice, then It'll be a huge conservation win for South Africa, and we'll be able to show that we can turn around the fates of so many species. So many of our seabird species are threatened with extinction if the current projected trajectory of mouse infestations does continue on the island. And it's an easy win because we just have to get rid of the mice. So yeah, please do support that project if you can. I would normally bring in Shamiso to talk about this slide over here. Shamiso has been really fantastic. I've become very much a glass kind of half empty kind of person, or even a glass is about to fall off the table and shatter into a million pieces. And Shamiso is just all peace and smiles and really represents that younger generation with a can-do attitude. And has a list of things over here that, you know, you as a member of the audience could do in order to make a difference. So think about doing some of those things as we start to wrap it up. The work that I've undertaken wouldn't have been possible without the support of various organizations, Icarpa Minerals, even Eskom, Mapula Trust, Italtal Ceramic Foundation Trust, Afrit First Rand, and so many people, like 100 people at least, contributed to Birds on the Brink. And with that, do think about giving that book some support. There's a fantastic special offer going on at the moment. And with that, over to you, Brett. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Ellen. I mean, I know it's a difficult topic, I mean, but it's fascinating to see and to have a glimpses to these beautiful bird species, and it's a shame that we are losing so many of them, particularly the vultures. I know that it's hard not to feel like the glass is half empty, but I think with Shamisa's attitude, which we'd like to bring her in here if it's possible, to be able to look and see if we can get onto some questions. But thank you for that, Ellen. That was fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, a very big topic and difficult to get through everything. As you said in your first slide, each one of those could have been a talk on their own. But I think to encapsulate, to see where we are, this is a great start, and definitely got the grey matter working. Our first question here is from Roger, and he has asked, is there any chance that birds... Hello, Shamiso, nice to see you.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Is there any chance that these birds on the brink could migrate to Europe or the Americas or even the Far East as the climate changes, like some of the insects are doing as the weather warms up?
Okay, it sounds like a sciencey question. So shall I field that one? And then so you can see if you've got anything to add there. Yeah, changing ranges and distributions in response to climate change, that's a real thing. We are seeing distributional changes as a consequence of warming for many different species. Unfortunately, it's a connected world, and species like Cape rock jumper, there is nowhere to migrate to. So as a result, it can only move upwards. Its climate space isn't moving upwards to Europe. It's perhaps moving closer to Antarctica, but it's not a pelagic bird species. And that little window at the peak of a mountain where it's cold enough for that bird to exist, that's shrinking upwards. And as a result, that just isn't an escape avenue for many of the bird species, unfortunately. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Ronnie's asked here, an update, please, on the mouse eradication project. He thought that it had failed. Is it still being progressed with? And how can one eliminate this pest successfully?
Shamiso, do you want to tackle that one?
Oh, okay. So it has not failed. I actually haven't undertaken it yet. I believe fundraising is still underway, as well as planning to make sure that, you know, the attempt is as successful as possible.
There we go, asked and answered. So we do, and if anybody wants to get involved in that, we can, you know, what in terms of fundraising and is there anything? It's just really a fundraising effort that's required to get that project off the ground.
Yeah, so there have been failures on some other islands, which is possibly where the confusion comes in. But
Sure.
as a result, the timeline for implementing the eradication action on Marion Island has been pushed back because the scientists are learning from those failures elsewhere. And it's a massive undertaking. It's a very expensive undertaking. There's a lot of fundraising that still needs to happen. We've got the world's best conservationists and practitioners in order to undertake this exercise once that window of opportunity does come around. Yeah, so Google mouse-free Marion, and you'll find all the associated web pages and possibilities to contribute to that very valuable project.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Roger's got a second question here. Are there any new species being found and starting to breed in South Africa for the first time?
Yeah, this one for the Twitchers, hey? So there are every year new species being encountered in South Africa. There's literally an army of birdwatcher naturalists out there whose ambition, we could say, is almost to find out if a new species has been recorded to add to BirdLife South Africa's bird list. And the bird list grows year on year with the addition of new species. To find established colonies or new species, unfortunately, I've only got invasive alien species coming to mind because, I'm the half glass, half empty kind of guy. Quite a few lovebird species and escapees are now starting to establish within our urban environments. But southern distributional shifts are few and far to come by. But I'm going to give you an example of a species which was quite difficult in terms of the red listing project to actually give a status to. So quite a few of our species are listed as not applicable because we need a certain number of bird species in order to give them a category, a threatened protected status category. An African skimmer is a classic example, which used to breed in St. Lucia, Isimangaliso, disappeared from there, was classified as regionally extinct in the 2015 Red Data Book, but which from some years is recorded breeding, say for instance in the Northwest or in Kruger National Park, but a species we can't now call critically endangered because it'll be breeding one year and then not the next, so it'll bounce between a critically endangered and regionally extinct category status, which doesn't really make sense. But it's those species of conservation interest that we really want to be seeing establish themselves or re-establish themselves in South Africa. Thanks.
Fair enough. Ronnie's asked, I think it might connect to it here. So if is there any chance that you can have a bird that's doing badly here, but doing well in like the Northern Hemisphere be introduced to boost the numbers, or would that be considered as a bringing in invasive species? Is that possible to do something like that?
Yeah, I think we're at that point where we're needing to consider these sorts of actions, as bizarre as they may be. But those sorts of projects, while easy in theory, are confounded in all sorts of different ways by the realities of paperwork and transferring species and international treaties and protocols, which you'd have to get around in order to try and overcome those barriers. To save our species, really, as South Africans, Southern Africans, we need to act with what we've got over here, because we can't bring in a species from the Northern Hemisphere to a landscape where we don't have the conservation infrastructure ready to protect that species over here. We've got to address the threats which have driven these species to extinction or to endangered species status in the first place. Thanks.
Got it. Patricia says here, does BirdLife and bird conservation in general implement the conservation system with the landowners in the same way as the Botanical Society does for plant conservation? I'm thinking here, for example, of the Botha's lark challenges.
Yeah, I'll have to plead a little bit of ignorance as to the plant conservation strategies, but if they're anything aligned to what Sandby is doing, then there are a range of conservation actions and stewardship measures which are being applied. The easiest, or the thing that comes to mind, would be stewardship. So I'm an example of a landowner who has a contract nature reserve, one part of a contract nature reserve. So what is private land is now given over to the state for the conservation of biodiversity, and this is a a focus of conservation work being undertaken by BirdLife South Africa through the regional conservation and the landscape conservation programs.
Thank you for that. Ronnie's asked another thing here, specifically about the hardy-dars. We know it's a non-local pest in the Western Cape and is threatening our local birds. Why is it not being culled? And this is interesting. As a former Durbanite, to have seen the slow migration and now a sort of infestation of hardy-dars that weren't here 10 years ago, for example. Is this something that is being noted, or is there any kind of talk around it?
Shamisa, have you got an opinion on this one?
Well, goodness. This is just very funny
You're
to
here
me.
to field the most difficult questions.
Hardy does get such a bad rep. Yes, no comment. Could I say no comment? I'm not sure that I would support the culling, but of course, you know, yeah, no, tricky question, Alan.
So, well, I suppose
it is a tricky question.
If we broaden it, is what happens when one species starts becoming more dominant and thereby threatens other local species? So, and is that in fact happening? Or is it just the perception that hardy-dars are a pest, and are they actually threatening local birds? I think that's a way that we can talk around the subject.
Yeah, I mean, the hardy-dar is one of these sentinel species of change, right? It's doing very well. And the reason it's doing very well is because people are modifying the landscapes, which it loves. It loves these grasslands and these irrigated areas and these agricultural areas that used to be all bushy and shrubby, and which weren't full of like wetlands that it could probe its beak into. So we've created an ecological niche for this bird species, which, you know, through no malintent of its own, has come and said, thank you very much, people, for your golf courses and your lawns. I appreciate your existence. I'm going to praise you every day by going hardy-dar, which is really just my way of saying I love people, and I'm here, and I'm giving thanks. My call to thanks to people. So, you know, if we started culling hardy-dars, I mean, well, what's the good? We've converted some species' natural habitat to a habitat that another species likes, and just culling hardy-dars isn't going to work. I mean, as much as they're not people's favorite bird species, we just need to learn to speak their language, maybe.
Interesting. So it's more a case of get the habitats back to being more favorable for the other species, as opposed to the hardy-dar being a threat. We're the threat to the other species by changing their habitats, not the hardy-dars being here.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Asked and answered. That's great. And then just looking ahead, are there any reasons for optimisms? Can you share some examples of where conservation actions have successfully turned around the fortunes of some species? I mean, let's think of glass half full here.
Shamisa, that's one for you, hey?
Okay. No, 100%. I mean, Alan did include some conservation success stories in the talk, and I really do love the one about the spectacled petrel, which, you know, with human intervention does show that we can absolutely make a difference. There's so many different ways that people can contribute to this, from citizen science to actually just appreciating nature, to volunteering for programs, volunteering for conservation work through conservation organizations, etc. So, I mean, I would say 100%. There's always something that we can do.
Right. Thank you.
Yes.
You mentioned the hardy-dars being a sentinel species, and I know in the book you talk about certain birds being sentinels of biodiversity. Can you just expand on what that means in terms, practical terms, in terms for the ecosystem and for people?
Sure. So sentinel species is one that looks out for those around it. So in terms of classical ecological theory, things like meerkats involve in sentinel behavior. There's always some part of the group that's looking out and trying to detect danger on behalf of the family. This is something that I looked at, for instance, at macaws in the Peruvian Amazon, where there was a theory that the birds are sitting on the tops of the trees are looking out for those birds which are going down to vulnerable and exposed positions on the clay, for instance. And in our case over here is that we're all reliant on a healthy ecosystem. We're all reliant on nature. Maybe we've become disconnected from nature, but it keeps us alive. The air we breathe, the water we drink, much of the food that we eat comes from nature. And by observing some of these bird species, which are so reliant on nature, we're able to see if they're no longer doing well, then they are signaling that there are declines, there are problems in nature, in ecological systems. And we see that through the cascading effects, which start from grassroots level all the way up to population level impacts. So vultures are a classic example, which are really in decline and point to a myriad of problems which are happening at lower trophic levels. So we're looking to these bird species, and we can see that they're shouting and screaming that there are problems, and we need to do something to address those, not just for their sake, but for our sake too.
Well, thank you. Anything to add there, Shamisa? Otherwise, I think that's the end of we don't have any more questions in our box. It leaves me to say thank you so much for everybody for joining us. Thank you for the two of you for taking the time, and everybody involved in writing this book and bringing it to publication. Thank you, Alan, for the talk and putting that together. Thank you to Belinda in the background for keeping everything running smoothly. Thank you, Shamisa, for joining us for the Q&A. Thank you for everybody again. Let's look forward to seeing you in October for our next Wednesday talk. Have a wonderful day, everybody. See you again then. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.